right, here we go. Another Square Dance Callers Talking. Tonight I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. Tonight I have Kevin Robinson. How are you, sir?
I am doing great, sir. How are you?
I'm very well. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you finally. I know we've talked a little bit on Facebook in the months and years past. Um, Really happy to get to sit down with you tonight. First of all, you said you're in Lexington. You're in Lexington, Kentucky, correct?
Right.
Now, how long you been there? Born and raised, that kind of stuff.
I was born in Winchester, which is 18 miles east. Might as well call it Lexington. It's so close. And lived here all my life, pretty much.
That's outstanding.
Maybe 5 years in Indianapolis for a job, but
All right.
mostly right here.
All right. So just Lexington, Kentucky, and we talked when we were talking earlier. You said most all your traveling's been done by car because for about a 10-year span you're a full-time caller. So let's
Right.
get into that. When did you start Square Dance calling?
I started in the winter of 77. It was 1977, not 1877.
Okay.
I was about 10 years old, 11 years old, and my grandparents had danced 2 years before I did, and I would go with them. And there was lots of people my age, and I talked to them, but I wanted to dance with them too. And I told my grandparents, if I could learn to call, I will learn to dance. So at my halfway dance, I did my first singing call.
That's incredible, man. I was gonna say, oh, we're obviously we're right at the same age because I was gonna say in '77 I was 10, so we're right on there. So your grandparents, so with any other family members that got you involved with that, or it's just your grandparents and you?
It was just them dancing.
Okay.
Yeah, and they got to where they were traveling quite a bit with it. And the Lexington area back then, almost all of the surrounding counties, every county that you could touch had at least one club. And then if you went out 2 counties, there was another club. So there was lots of dancing to be had. Plus there was camping trips and hotel trips, mostly camping. That was my grandparents' probably favorite thing to do in the summertime.
Do you still you do any camping yourself, you and your family?
Not unless I just sleep in the car.
Okay. As a Square Dance caller, I'm sure that's happened a time or two. I understand completely.
When we were full time, we did a lot of sleeping in the car, no doubt, but not so much now.
So when you started out when you were 10, that came up that you said you would dance if you could call. What kind of pushed you toward that? You just like singing? You like being on the microphone? What do you think?
I was scared of the microphone. I'd never held a microphone,
Okay.
and it just seemed like so much fun. And of course, I didn't know that 11-year-olds could tell adults what to do. I enjoyed that pretty well for what it lasted, you know. But yeah, I enjoyed singing. I enjoyed music. I'd already had a year of violin and piano playing at home, just, having a good time with that. And once that bug hit, though, when I thought I was going to learn to call, that was all I wanted to do.
So you called your first tip at your halfway dance for your life.
Right.
So it just took off from there. Do you remember who the caller was that was teaching you back then?
Oh, absolutely. His name was Topple McGuffey.
And
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say he was a local caller that did some regional traveling, but man, he was really well loved around here.
And I ask everybody, so if he was teaching you to dance, I'm sure he had a little part in the mentoring, but who were some of the people that kept you going? Because it's a rough road if you try and do it by yourself. Who helped you along the way?
Absolutely. Well, he was the start of it. And then another guy around this area is Mark Patterson.
Okay.
I would say he was probably the biggest influence and mentor that I had. And you've probably heard his name bandied about in a couple of these conversations. He just had a great ability to teach. He was a great singer, his ability to call, and then he was just able to convey it. it's kind of amazing that way.
Now, have you gone to any caller schools or anything like that as you were coming up?
Not as I was coming up. After I got married, and I'd been calling about 10 years already,
Okay.
uh, my wife and I wanted to go to English Mountain, Tennessee. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not heard of that. No, sir.
At one time, it was a square dance resort,
Okay.
and I don't believe that's what it is now.
Mhm.
Uh, but it was that, and it was literally up a mountain. And Wade Driver, you've probably heard of him,
Yes, sir, I have.
and Don Williamson of the Red Boot Boys were the two instructors.
Okay.
I went to that, or we went to that, and it was a great time. I was the only one with that much experience. Most everybody else was less than a year's experience. So Wade and Don, though, they went out of their way to make sure that I got something out of it, as well as the other people as too. And Wade taught me a lot of stuff about how music is put together for square dancing and what to listen for, what makes a good song, a square dance song, and how to program dances, which he still teaches that today, I know, or did. And then Don, his thing was the choreography, and he would pull me aside and work with me on mental image before I knew what mental image was. He'd say, "Now I'm going to call, you follow in your head what I'm doing," and he started off really easy, and at the time I knew some advanced, and he would throw some advanced stuff in there, and he would stop and poke me when I mess it up. He'd get to a certain point and say, "Okay, what position are they in now?"
That's a valuable tool if you learn that early on. It really is the mental.
Yeah,
If you can follow a portion of it in your head, it's a big step up. Hand up really is.
it is really very handy, and years later I bought Don Beck's book on mental image calling, and that was a big help. And I don't use it to the full extent that book goes through, but if you go to a club for the first time and you don't know anybody that's there, that mental image calling can really help you through it, because you don't have to worry about who's dancing with who their corner and partner is, at least for the first tip or two, and the first tip or two I try to make fun anyway, and not really dive into anything deep.
Yes.
And that combined with a little bit of module calling, and unless there's some standout people, and how they dress, and it's easy
Yeah.
to slide off of them, but that wasn't always the case.
No, like you were saying, you started so long ago. It was full square dance attire.
Yep.
Would be matched. Then you got into the clubs that wore all the same thing. Now at first I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, when a whole club came in with squares to come to visit you. Man, this is awesome. You try and call to it, and you realize you're looking at the same squares, same shirts. So that's a rough go there. But no, back when people wore square dance attire, everybody did some form of it.
Right.
It was easier to call now, and of course now you've got so many people that will dance the gender, male, female. They'll swap over on you, and at my club they'll swap over in the middle of a thing if I'm not paying attention, just to try just for fun. But that's really that's smart, especially for some of the newer callers that watch these videos.
Mm-hmm.
First and second tip, and of course now the way we do here, and I found out that it's different. Here we do your typical dance. I don't call advanced or anything, but we do mainstream plus, and then you kind of get a feel for the floor after that if they want to do another plus.
Right.
But yeah, that first and second tip for me, even the plus tip, is very low level. I would say, for my calling, because I can call at a higher level. But unless it's my club and I know every single dancer, I'm going to start right at the bottom at the chicken plucker, right and left,
right,
left couples, and keep it simple, just so I can see what they can do. And and then I'm also learning, okay, that guy goes with that girl, I know that, so that's awesome words there. I ask everybody to give me, especially with as many years as you have, some advice for other callers. Do you and I usually do that later on, but what do you have any advice for like new callers or people coming along?
I think one of the things that you mentioned is having mentors. because it is so tough to try to pick up on your own.
It is.
So many little things, how to read a floor for danceability, like you're talking about. That would be hard to just pick up on your own, just that one little thing. You really want to know your music, singing calls and patterns, but with singing calls especially, uh, one of the things that Wade taught me how to do, and really before that, Mark had showed me this as well, is well put together music. They may play the melody in a singing call, and if you can call to the melody, when you stop the calling or you're singing, there's another instrument that comes in and answers you.
Right.
And use that to the fullest effect. That's it takes knowing the music though and listening to it, and if you're not musically minded, if you don't really know what you're listening for, that's where a mentor would come in and help you with that too. Of course, musicians probably understand the terminology of instruments that fill the gaps. That's what they're doing, filling in the holes. Another thing is practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and another thing, I want to add this too.
Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, I love Taminations and Colorama and the computerized squared answers, but there's something to pushing the checkers.
Mhm.
There's a slowness to it. You've got to think it through, the body flow. If somebody said, do I use one or the other, I would say go with the checkers.
Mhm. Yep.
And then use both if you can or if you want to, but mostly go with the checkers.
Yeah. And I've got several sets of checkers I keep with me. One always goes with me to work or wherever I'm going in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But I use, especially, if I'm at work or I'm somewhere where I just have access to a laptop, I'll use Taminations, and I write more stuff than I could ever call. If I called every night for the rest of my life, I could never touch half of what I've written. Now,
Right.
a quarter of that half of what I've written, I wouldn't want to call for anybody because it was just awful when I was starting out. I thought I was doing something and I was not. But I can look back and see that now. But yeah, you have to do something, depending on how long you've been calling, almost every day. I'm at a roughly 13, 14 years in, and I have to do something, even if it's 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I got a break at work. I'll go Taminations on my computer real quick, and I'll write 3 or 4 patterns, and you got to do something in the checkers, and that's huge. It really is. And what I was going to say earlier too, when you were talking about the melody and all, when we were coming up, now, like I said, I started 12, 13, 14 years ago. You've been calling since you were 10. But there's so many record labels now, and the music is so good. And of course, you've got Wade Driver as one of your mentors, and that guy's had a fantastic record label for as long as I've ever known about square dancing. And so some of the music now, it makes it easier, and it's more enjoyable. But
yeah,
there's still a handful of callers that use the same, some of them will still brag about using records. I was like, well, just try and buy a digital thing every now and then. I'm not opposed to records, but you go to Caller Lab now, and they don't have a record player. Or if you go to Nationals, some of the Nationals won't have record players. So you've got to have a laptop if you want to go up there and call any. Oh man, that's great stuff, Kevin. So with the mentors you've had, if you could do anything differently going all the way back, would you do something different?
Wow, that's a good question.
I just came up with it about five podcasts. Kind of surprising folks with it.
Oh, things that I would have done differently, probably not a whole lot because, the trajectory went the way that it went, and it was a great trajectory, especially after I got married. Now, maybe as a high schooler, to get to some of the classes that I was teaching, some of the dances that I was doing, either my mom or my grandfather had to take me. And but you can't change that. So what could I do to help that? And I got stories I guess I better not tell about
Listen,
beautiful.
statute of limitations is probably up. You can probably tell.
One time my grandfather got he was just so he was still working and took me to a dance that was 2 hours away. It was in Ashland, Kentucky. And we weren't, of course, they wanted to go out and eat after the dance. And he was just dead dog tired. He said, I can't drive. He said, you're going to have to drive if we're going to get home. So I was okay with that. Now I had just a little bit of experience of driving that I hadn't even told him about. And so I drove his pickup truck all the way back to Winchester. Had a great time doing it. I was so excited. I was so excited. I didn't have any trouble staying awake, but he was out.
Oh my God. That's awesome. Yeah, there's a handful of callers that I've talked to over some of these podcasts and just places I get to go to that same thing. They had a parent or a grandparent or aunt or uncle taking them to dances. They couldn't drive. Gosh, that must have been awesome. I wish if I could go back and do it differently, I would have learned a lot further back. I would have liked to have been learning. So because now I don't know what I'd have done with it if I'd have been 12, 13, 14 years old, square dancing. I don't know. We started dancing 31 years ago because my son was 3 and he's 34 now. And, I didn't decide until 2012 when he was in college that I wanted to start dancing again and I'd like to call. And I had the mentors. I had really good mentors and I've gone to a ton of caller schools. It's been a pleasure doing that. Now, you told me that for 10 years you were a full-time traveling caller. Tell me something about that.
That was quite the experience. I'm sad that now there's one thing I would do different is I wish I could go back and take my current mobile phone with me and its camera abilities.
Yep.
Because we went and saw some beautiful places. And I learned early on that I did not mind, as a couple, we didn't mind staying with other couples. And a lot of times clubs would say, save us money, forget the motel and just stay with some couple. And we stayed with some marvelous people in some marvelous locations. We stayed with one couple that their house looked like a log cabin. And we were eating breakfast and you go out their side door, but you didn't really go outside. It was just into another room. If you took enough steps, you would be in about 4 feet of water because that was where their swimming pool was inside the house. And he had one of those, he had we would call it a collector's Fender Stratocaster guitar from the 50s with an amplifier that looked like a bass amp. It was so big, but it was really just a guitar amp. It was taller than I am, and I'm 5'5". I had to reach up to touch the knobs. And man, I wanted to hear that thing played because it was and I'm like, it's a strange place to put it. He says, yeah, but when we have pool parties, somebody's always here that knows how to play.
So you didn't get a chance to play it?
No. He said that some of the tubes were out and he hadn't had a party in a while at that time. But he said that's what it was for. One house we stayed in was in, I think it was Bristol, Tennessee. What's the Tri-Cities up in the northeastern part of Tennessee? There's Johnstown, Bristol.
I do not know that part.
Well, anyway, there's 3 cities. They call them the Tri-Cities up there, over there. And the couple we stayed home with, we walk in their front door, big, huge house, and good thing because she had a full pipe organ inside. It literally, the pipes took up the entire wall, and it was not a small wall. I mean, it was incredible. And I was like, did we get to hear that?
Oh, I can't remember.
I think she played it for us.
Made us deaf.
Yeah, she said it would have made us deaf. But that was just awesome. And I told you about being pulled over before, up and down in we had this little Volvo, and in North Carolina, going up and down the hills, it wouldn't gain any speed. But going down the hills, the thing would take off. Finally, the state trooper pulled me over, and after he looked at our clothes, there's four of us in the car in square dance clothes, and looked at my equipment in the trunk and tried to figure that out. And then the guy behind me in the back seat said, "Hey, Officer Joe, is that you doing?" Oh, so fun times. And one time we were in Albuquerque. No, I take that back. We were in Amarillo on our way to Albuquerque. And there was a truck stop. In the front of this truck stop was nearly all glass, which is all part of the story. And it was dark and it was kind of quiet. And we decided we were going to sleep in their parking lot. So we just laid the seats back in the car and we were sound asleep. And some hooligans kept knocking on the windows, trying to wake us up. So we kind of raised up and I looked up and I was looking at all that glass and I said, "Why are all those people running out of that building?" About that time, a policeman asked us to roll the window down and said a tornado was definitely bearing down on our location. Asked us where we were going. I said, "Well, we're trying to get to Albuquerque." And he said, "Get in the car, go as fast as you need to." And we were in that slow car up that last hill. Wasn't going to be very fast, but he said, "Once you get through those mountains," he said, "the tornado won't follow you there. You'll be just fine." And sure enough, we did make it just fine. And part of that trip, of course, was getting to see the Grand Canyon and Mesa Verde and Colorado. That was beautiful. Done a few festivals that were pretty big. We went to Pennsylvania quite often, and they had club up there that I called for, Oxford Squares in Oxford, Pennsylvania. And the first year that I was there, I don't remember what the story was, but we had a good time with Peel the Top. And it kind of became this joke during the dance. The next year I came, all the club members had on these white shirts and black stripes that went from shoulder down to the waist. And I thought, well, that's a cool color. That's their colors, black and white, I think. I think that's what their colors were. But they all had that on and they were a plus club, I think. I think I just called plus all night. But anyway, the first time I called Peel the Top, they all stopped, turned to face me and had Velcro.
Oh, that's good, man.
It's the only time people have ever got me stumped. The what? Chicken? Oh, yeah. And then one time we took the trip, one of the last trips we took in that car was to Connecticut, and the air conditioner broke on the way up, and it was dead heat of summer. Oh, we were so hot, and I was worried about being late because we got hung up in New York City in 5 o'clock traffic with the air conditioner broke. And we were trying to dodge all the pieces and parts of other cars in the road. And yeah, could have built another car on the way to the dance. There was so much there. But when we finally arrived, Linda said, "All I want to do is take a shower, get in bed before the dance." We did have time to do that. We walked in the room. They had her a beautiful bouquet of roses from the club on the bed. And while we were resting, they called and said, "We just want y'all to come a little bit early to the dance. We've got a nice surprise for you. We don't want you to feel like you're away from home too bad." And we get to the dance and they had buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken for supper. And then they wanted to go out after that. And so we go out after that to, I think it was a Jerry's restaurant. You ever heard of them?
I have not.
Kind of like a Denny's. You ever heard of Denny's?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Jerry's and Denny's are almost identical. And we were there, and the waitress comes back, and she hands the menu back to me, and sits down in front of me, and she says, "I got 10-minute break. Read to me." I said, "What?" She said, "I like how you talk."
Oh God. Yep.
And another great story involves Tommy Miller. He and I were doing some kind of weekend festival. I think it was somewhere in Virginia. And we were up pretty late on the Friday night or Saturday night. And of course, if I'm up late, I appreciate my sleep. I didn't want to get up early. So my wife gets up early to go to the continental breakfast and runs into Tommy at the continental breakfast. And she gives him the key. He comes running into the hotel room and dive bombs onto the bed with me. I'm not going to say anything else. Just let that be. Let that be in your mind.
Tom is one of my favorite people just to sit around and talk to.
He's great. He really is. He's a good guy, good caller, good singer too. Let's see. Oh, another fun story.
Yeah.
Down in Florida. And this was a dance we were just visiting at. I wasn't calling, but Linda's dad used to live just outside of Tampa. And so we decided to go to Strawberry Square. And they had a full house that night. I don't even know who was calling. Wasn't anybody that I knew. But you know, if we were in their 20s, everybody else was 70 and up. And they decided, because one, we were young, two, we were the visitors, that they needed to induct us into their after party club. But you couldn't go to the after party without being inducted. Well, the name of the club was the Golden Nut Club. And I think one of the ladies danced like a gypsy woman in front of me. And it was all cute. It was all fun. And then one of the gentlemen had an overcoat. And it was obvious he didn't have a shirt on underneath it. And he walked up in front of my wife and he had this thing with, there's a bottle brush plant. You know what that is? And he goes like that, in front of my wife, and shakes and wiggles, does his little dance. And they partied there till about 1 a.m. And then they said something like, well, we got to go. They're kicking us out. We got us a motel room. Let's go over there and finish our party there. I was like, you're going to fit 60 people in that motel room? I guess they did. Yeah, that just crazy fun stuff on trips. Yeah, those people wore us out too. Linda said they could have gone all night long. I think she and I just wanted to go home and go to sleep. Well, let's see. And then we did the occasional. Why did I book things the way I booked? I had a dance in the Oxford, Pennsylvania area. And then the very next night had to be in Kentucky for a dance. And we were up at 5 a.m. after the Friday night dance to get to the Saturday night dance, and made it with like 30 minutes to spare. And I remember that. Yeah. And then I had a small day job for a while and took a Florida job one weekend and had another job the next weekend. Because I guess at the time I booked it, I didn't have the day job. But
with all the traveling you did, man, nowadays, and not exclusively, but we dance in gymnasiums, rec centers, community centers, what have you. Some people have dedicated halls. It's few and far between from the places that I go anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the venues that stand out to you in all those travels, whether it be a floor or, just the surroundings?
In Knoxville, I remember calling at, I think it was called the Grand Square Hall. I believe that's what that was, but that was a nice room to call in. Albuquerque had a great room.
Is that the one? I just talked about this not long ago. The one in Tennessee, is that the one that the stage is way off the ground? There's stairs going down to the floor.
It seems like it.
They've got all the equipment already mounted for you. You just go in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think if that's the same place, I've got to call there one time. It's phenomenal. And like you were saying, you're 5'5". I'm probably 5'5". I like to say 5'6". But anywhere that can give me a stage that's at least a foot off the ground is fantastic. If you give me something that's 3 foot off the ground, I'm the king of the world, for a better term, because I can see everybody.
I hear you.
All right, so go ahead. You were telling me about the other floor, the other venues.
Yeah, let's see. I remember Albuquerque's dance hall was real nice.
Okay.
And Where else have I been? We've been so many places.
Center was nice, wasn't it?
Uh, when we were in English Mountain, I told you about that. They had halls made for square dancing, I believe, two of them, and I don't remember them being particularly great sounding, but they were great floors to dance on. And lots of places have had great floors. It's just we're not finding them so much these days.
With it's hard to find the hardwood floors anymore unless you might get to be in a gymnasium sometimes because there's few dedicated halls. I'm sure they're out there.
Mhm.
We were talking earlier, Tony Oxendine at Pride RV Resort. His hall, he's got a story behind the hardwood floors and everything, and it's just a fabulous, and it's built for square dancing. And there are a few places
Right.
out there. Little place down in Macon,
Barn was nice up there on the other side of Simpson.
100-year-old school. Still had the floors. Fantastic place. But oh my gosh, man! So you've done a lot of driving because you said you've never flown.
Never flown.
All these Pennsylvania and New Mexico trips you're driving to. Great day.
Yep, we've been to Kansas and just south of Chicago, Connecticut, Indiana, a lot of places east of the Mississippi, with Albuquerque being the exception.
In Tyler, Texas.
Tyler, Texas. I guess that's on the other side of the Mississippi too.
I'm hoping to get to call in Texas pretty soon. And I've been there for conventions and got to call a tip here and there, but at some point I hope to get to do a dance over there. Now, are you a member of Caller Lab or American? What do you do for the caller part of it?
I'm not an active member with Caller Lab, but I do pay the BMI ASCAP
Okay.
licensing. But where I don't travel as much, it just doesn't really fall into the scope of things I need to do.
Right. And the main reason I asked that is because where I get to being out of Georgia, I told you earlier, I get to see one or two regular callers that aren't from Georgia. I've got a couple of good friends that are in the Tennessee area that I get to see. But Caller Lab and national conventions is where I get to bump into everybody.
Right.
And I tell people, and I'm certainly not, pushing any one thing over another, but Caller Lab, just their conventions, when I started going to those probably in 2014, I was just like, man, of course, you at such a young age coming along, I went to Caller Lab into a national convention, and I go to Caller Lab, and Scott Bennett is sitting there selling his music at a table, and I'd bought one or two songs at that point in my career, and I was like, oh my God, that's Scott Bennett, and then I see I'd met Tony Oxendine, Ted Lizotte, these guys that are putting this music out, and I was starstruck. I was a fanboy. I was just like, oh my God. So you get to meet people like that. So reason I ask that too is, I look forward to meeting people in person, hanging out, getting to talk some. Do you go to any state conventions or any conventions like that?
I haven't for several years. Now, to get back to the Caller Lab, I was a Caller Lab member while I was traveling or when I was calling full time.
Okay.
But just we're not now. And then the state conventions, it's kind of the same thing. Occasionally we may go to Ohio State. We have one here in Kentucky, and it's generally down on the southern end of Kentucky. It's a great dance hall down there. From what I understand, I've never even been to it. It just doesn't fall on a weekend that I can go.
Gotcha.
And outside of that, we don't really do too many conventions. What now? Yeah. One of the reasons is I play in 4 different bands. And
you said you play just about anything with strings on it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And you've got lessons coming up. We'll talk about the square dance. Let's talk about you. So you play in 4 different bands. What, I guess being from Kentucky, I'm just going to stereotype at this point. What's your favorite genre of music?
That's a really good question. I like lots.
Okay.
But mostly during the day, I'm going to listen to jazz.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, particularly, my favorite is Oscar Peterson piano.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of people don't know who he is, but in jazz circles, people that know jazz know who he is or was. But I listen to that during my work day. I'm listening to everything. It might be a little bit of country. One of my favorites is Tishina Hosa out of Austin, Texas area, or
Okay.
San Antonio, wherever she's from. And I listen to electronic dance music.
Nice.
Uh,
Okay.
I listen to everything techno, Nightwish, if you know who that is. They're how did you, they have a name for it? Orchestrated metal.
Okay.
They're called Nightwish is the name of the group.
I'll look that up.
They have a woman that can and sometimes does sing opera while they're playing their music. And if you go back and listen to some of their songs, one of their most popular songs is they do a cover of Phantom of the Opera that is outstanding, to use your terminology.
Okay.
But I just like all kinds of stuff. Of course, when I'm going to the gym, I don't listen to nothing slow or sad,
Gotcha.
listen to some bluegrass and country. I guess I like everything.
Okay. What do you like to play the most?
For square dancing,
Just for you, and for what do you like to play?
oh, instrumentally. Yeah. Everything that I play. Okay. I've played in church orchestra, a very large church orchestra, but that was with a violin or a viola, whatever they want me to do. And I play with a 1940s big band,
Nice.
and they have had me play drums, bass, and guitar. I started off as a bass player with them. And then another guy came in and said, I want to play bass. So I said, well, they don't have a rhythm guitar. I'll try that. So I did that. And, for the most part, the band doesn't care what the rhythm section's doing as long as you're playing the right rhythm.
Right. Right.
Being in the same key helps, but they've only let me play drums twice. And I play banjo for a Dixieland band. And also currently, the most recent band is an American Standards band, and I play bass and do vocals. And some of the other guys do vocals as well. And we just kind of all take turns. And I'll call them polite groups. They're not bar bands by any shape of the imagination. It's just fun music. We'll play. The big band is actually a service organization.
Okay.
And they will play for donations, and all the donations go back to buying musical instruments for children that can't afford musical instruments, and providing lessons for them at times if they don't have a school that'll teach them. So, and the Dixieland band is also part of that same service organization. So they're not money making things. It's just our way of giving back. And the guys in the band, some of those guys have been, just when you meet them, they're phenomenal people. One of the guys was a dear friend of ours. He played with Ray Charles, Glenn Miller, Willie Nelson, and talk about somebody full of stories for his lifetime. He started off at 4 years old playing the accordion for Oral Roberts' TV show.
Wow.
Nice. When Oral Roberts was in Cincinnati. And that was how he could play accordion before he got on the platform, but that's how his musical career got started. And that caliber of people, it's just amazing.
So now
amazing guys.
With your square dance, what's some of your, of course, the music, like we were saying, it's so good right now. And it has been for years, and it's all over the board. Country, there's AC/DC songs out there now. Okay. What's some of your favorite singing calls to do?
Well, as far as the more newer stuff, Acme has a version of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen.
Yeah. Okay.
One of them has no leads, no melodies. And that's a great one for me to fiddle to on the grand squares
Okay.
because I can do whatever I want and there's no fiddle. And then in keeping with the fiddle, I use Seminole Wind, which is, my song.
Oh, small one. Okay.
And I don't know if you know the story on that one. I did all the music on that one. The producer said this was back in 1992 or 91, something like that. She said, well, you've done Back in Baby's Arms. How about picking out another song and we'll get somebody to put the music together? And I said, how about I pick out the song and do the music? So after a little bit of deliberation, we found a studio close by and he gave me a really good rate for the day. And I spent about 6 months practicing. And I practiced every instrument and laid them down on a cassette tape, kind of got it arranged how I wanted it. And then I packed up the car, loaded that car with instruments, and drove them to the studio, unloaded them. We got it all done. I think maybe 2 takes per instrument. Packed it all back in. I did the mixing too. I wanted to know a little bit about mix engineering, and so he gave me a crash course of sitting at the studio board and teaching me, if you make a change here, you got to make a change somewhere else so that they're always balancing each other out. And so it was just great experience. And
Awesome.
then that same guy ended up calling me back. That engineer was also a representative for other artists, and he asked me to come back and play fiddle for him one day. And he said there'll be a guitarist and a keyboard player also there for this project that we're doing. And when I got there, the guitarist was Kevin Cyrus, which was Billy Ray Cyrus's younger brother.
Okay.
And man, he was a nice guy, but he could sure play that guitar. Man, he was great. But that's how Seminole Wind came into being.
I
But
love Seminole. I probably do it 3 or 4 times a year, depending on where I am. I love that. I love the John Anderson version.
Mhm.
The square dance is awesome too. I didn't know that
Yeah,
was for you.
if you use the grand version, that's mine.
Brand, okay.
Yeah, and
like
I did
version.
every instrument and did it all in one day. As far as the recording, I did it all in one day. Took me months to prepare it. But the fiddle story, I used to call for a local club in Cincinnati, and I was just trying to think, what can I do that's different? They were having pretty good dances, but this was vinyl records day. There was no computers at that point, no MP3s. And I was like, what can I do that's different? And I had this green record by Lamont. You ever heard of that label?
Mm-mm. Lamont?
Lamont. They were famous for, I think they did a version of the Monster Mash,
Okay.
was one of their biggest square dance hits. But they had this, if you're going to play in Texas, you got to have a fiddle in the band. Well, where they put the fiddle was no place I wanted it to be. I wanted to be at the Grand Square. So I thought, what if I can figure out what key that is? Maybe I'll just play it, and go home. My fiddle was this was blue, Kentucky blue fiddle. And of course, that the minute you take it out of the case, people see that blue and they go, oh, yeah. But it sounded awful. So, I mean, you've heard the beginner screeches. That thing did it no matter who was playing it. It was just an awful violin. But anyway, I did that and they kind of went wild. And I thought, well, I'll do it again. So the next dance I called, which was a little bit further from home, they went wild over it too. So the fiddle really kind of became my calling card, I guess you could say. It's my little perspective that nobody else was doing. And it got to the point where people would put in the contract, please bring fiddle.
Wow. That's awesome, man. I did not know that.
Yeah. And my wife, I told you we lived for maybe 5 years in Indianapolis. That was for my job, but she got a job working at a violin shop. She met lots of classical players, bluegrass players, but while she was there, I told her I'd like to have a different electric violin, and I knew what brand I wanted, and I wanted it to be hot pink because I figured nobody's going to steal it, and that's my favorite color. and we actually had it ordered, but the company, they were called Zeta, Z-E-T-A.
Mhm.
They called us back and said, "Hey, we got this purple one. We won't charge you for the paint job if you'll take it. Somebody ordered it and they don't want it." So I ended up taking this purple fiddle, and that's what I've been using for quite a few years now. And uh, but while I was in Indianapolis with that fiddle, she also met one of George Jones's stage fiddlers that would go on tour with him, and he found himself wanting to stay home and take care of his mom, so he quit the travel life and started teaching. And I became his one adult student. And on top of that, he said, "You're not a beginner." He said, "You're working me to death." But he was like how I wanted to play. He wanted to play. He could play bluegrass, jazz, rock and roll. He taught me how to play guitar licks on the fiddle, which I'd never even thought of or conceived of. But he said, "Well, do this slide here and run up the scale that way, like you would if you were on a guitar." And I was like, "I never even thought you could do that." But he was just full of great ideas like that. Plus, he was also a music reader. He could read music. It wasn't all by ear. So, we would go from maybe 2 or 3 weeks working on Irish music, 2 or 3 weeks working on classical music, 2 or 3 weeks just working on bowing technique. And so that was the longest stint of private lessons I ever had was with him for a year. And that was a great, great experience. But that fiddle and Seminole Wind, getting back to that, that really helped me get tons of bookings. And
Okay.
Buddy Weaver runs American Square Dance Magazine now, but back then it was a print magazine. And the record company put their full page ad in there for Seminole Wind. And man, I was getting calls all over the place. People never heard me were calling me, which I thought was kind of amazing.
That's a great feeling. Yes, it is. That's awesome. Gosh, man. I had no idea, Kevin. This is a fantastic story. And I just asked this. You hadn't mentioned it yet. Do you play mandolin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because
Mandolin.
I've never had the ability to or tried to play an instrument. And when my son graduated high school, went off to college, I told my wife, I got to find something to do. And we had not gotten back into square dancing yet, so there was no calling or anything. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to learn to play an instrument. So I went and took mandolin lessons for about a year at like Ken Stanton Music or something.
Oh yeah,
I didn't put the work in. I know from calling now how I do, working every day at something. If I'd have done that with the mandolin, I'd probably be able to play some. But I would go and do my hour lesson at the store, and then I'd go home and I'd play for about 30 minutes, and then I'd set it down by the sofa for 6 days, and I'd go back.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Day. And after a year, my wife was like, "How long are you going to do this?" Because I was no better than the day I started, really. And so I was like, you know what, I'm not going to bother with this. So I've got it sitting in my in a case in the garage right now. So, so if we ever run it, and remind me, of course, it's left-handed, so it wouldn't be any good for you. You're not left-handed, are you?
No, but I could learn to play.
My wife can play piano. My son played saxophone all through grade school, middle school, high school, and messed around with it in college a little bit, but he doesn't do it anymore. It just amazed me to see people who can pick up an instrument and or figure it out. We gave him, but he wanted a bass guitar when he was in high school, so we bought him one. And one night I go up there, and of course it's very simplistic, but he's like, "Hey, come listen to this," and he played the opening to "Smoke on the Water."
Oh yeah.
How do you do that? And he's like, "I was just listening to it." Well, we bought him one of those little Casio keyboards, and he'd go up there and he'd start playing stuff, with 2 fingers. And I'm just blown away by somebody who has that type of ability, because I have zero. And people say, don't say that about yourself. I'm 57. I know what I can do on a musical instrument, and I ain't play it.
But you know what?
Okay.
Going back to the advice for callers, just like playing an instrument and calling, you don't do any of them overnight. You don't learn it overnight, is what I'm trying to say. It's a little here and a little there. And you might have to go back and pick up the little here that you did before to refresh your memory on it and pick up a few more things. It's not a fast learn.
It's not.
It's worth learning. It's worth taking the time to learn, but it's not a fast learn.
There's gratification. I mean, with anything that you work at, because and I've told this story too many times. I don't want to go too deep into it. The first 2 years that I called, I did singing calls. The gentleman who's passed away named Ray Monty was my first initial instructor, for lack of a better term, and a guy who's still out. He's still a good friend of mine, Randy Ramsey. Both of them Georgia callers. But all that Ray said, he said, here, he gave me a couple records, said, go learn these, Charlie. And I would come back and he'd put me up every dance. He'd put me up there. He'd go up there and do a singing call. And I could do a singing call. And I got so comfortable with it. And, he was like, you want to try some pattern? I was like, absolutely not. Because I can fail doing pattern. I'm not going to fail doing karaoke on a record.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'll memorize the figure that's on the record, and that's what you're getting. So I was happy in that little thing, but he said, man, you're never going to do a dance if you can't start doing pattern. The other instructor, Randy Ramsey, he would do that. He's like, hey, Charlie, go write 2 patterns for me. And so I would sit down with checkers and I'd write out a thing. And I'd take it up there and he's like, let me see that thing. And I'd show it to him and he'd wad it up and stick it in his back pocket. And he's like, go up there and do it. I didn't memorize it, buddy. I didn't memorize that. And he's so, if I could go back and do it different, I would have liked to get quicker into the pattern and the choreography. But yeah, it is practice. Well, if I'd have worked on the mandolin as much as that, I'd probably be able to play a couple songs. But yeah, it's work, and it's a pleasure when you are up there sight calling, memory, whatever you want to do. When you see that Alaman left set up from whatever position you're in, you're just like, oh man, I got this. And you call it, and and you're just on top of the world. And 2 tips later, you're looking out at, you don't recognize a soul. You're like, what am I doing? So it's you said you got lessons starting in January. What other type of stuff are you doing? You still traveling some or anything?
No traveling at all. Okay. The lessons are here in Lexington.
Okay.
We have 2 mainstream clubs here, and they have great leadership. Of course, every club member, we know everybody, and everybody's top notch. Both clubs work really hard individually to try to keep square dancing fostered and growing. And a lot of callers come through here and they say this is one of their favorite places to come to because of the enthusiasm of the dancers. Wow. And sometimes it's the size of the dances for such a small community that they're pleased with too. And if we don't have anybody come from out of state, Lexington can have a 10 square dance easy enough. And a lot of bigger places don't have that. So, they're very fortunate, but they do work at it. They're always trying to bring new people in. One of the clubs hosts what they call a 5th Friday friends and family dance. And it's just a fun dance, no pressure. They don't even pressure them to take lessons, but they hope that's what they'll do, that they'll get interested in it and want to take lessons. And I think that's been somewhat successful. And we have about 3 families that have teenagers and some adolescents that are square dancing, and talk about bringing enthusiasm into a place. That really does. I mean, it brings it for everybody, having the kids there, and they love that. And both of these clubs have just done remarkably well. Just like I say, the good leadership. They're very good to the callers. They, for graduation last year, one of the clubs, you know what Crocs are, the shoes?
Yeah.
My wife picked up a pair of yellow Crocs one year, and they were just a bit too small for her, but they fit me. So well, they were too big for her, but they fit me. And I put them on and went to my square dance class. It got a little bit of attention. So over time, I've now got 14 pairs of Crocs. So the club that graduated last winter, the two clubs take turns in the seasons who's going to have classes. They have 3-month classes twice a week. So they do a weekday class and a Saturday morning class, and that's how they get through their lessons. So in the last winter, 2023 winter, for a gift, they bought me the collector's item of a pair of Crocs, but they look like boots, cowboy boots. Even has the spur on the back. And they were so proud that they gave them to me, but I really like them. It's hard not to want to wear them everywhere because they're collectible. I want to preserve them, but I want to wear them. But getting back to the Crocs though, the other thing too is that the teenagers, for a gag at their graduation, they all wore different colored Crocs to
Nice.
show off, so they just put an element of fun in everything they do. The adults too, it's not just the kids, but the adults do it too. And I think that's why they're so successful. They just keep the fun in it. They do things together. They go to see shows. They go hear music things, eat out together. Of course, a lot of clubs do that anyway, but they just make a particular point to, and they make it a point to include everybody that wants to be included, so that nobody feels left out or whatever, like that.
I used to see a lot more of that before COVID, and using that as an excuse, but there were times every dance before I was calling all the time, when I was just calling a tip at a club or whatever, somebody had me come up, we were always going out afterwards. Some kind of, whether it be go to, I don't know, Applebee's and eat. We still have a couple clubs that will do that. They'll go out, and 10 or 12 of the dancers, the guys, will go drink 2 beers, and their wives will drive them home. And so every now we'll get into that little group. One of my favorite parts of the conventions that I go to, and national conventions, and state conventions are a little smaller, obviously, but getting to hang out with all the callers after, because they typically put us all in the same hotel, and so you get to hang out with people that I love talking to, but minus a Zoom call or just calling them on the phone, they live in Texas,
right,
Ohio. So, how many times am I going to get to see Jack Platties, except for if I go to a convention, and, just to sit and talk to those guys just in general is fantastic.
Yeah, I love Jack. He's a great guy.
And Jack, we were early on, and I didn't bring it up, but he was one of those ones that self-taught. When he was in the military, self-taught himself how to square dance call.
I didn't know that.
He told me that story. He was in the Air Force, and he was in Japan.
Right.
Is where he started calling, and he didn't know anything about sight calling, and he was just, and he said by the time he got back to the States, he thought he'd figured this whole thing out, and he was teaching up. But yeah, if you ever get the opportunity, when you see Jack again, if you do, ask him about that. Yep, self-taught from day one, and that just blew me away. I can't imagine what I would be if it was just self-taught myself. Well, I wouldn't be calling right now.
Yeah, because it's not an easy thing.
Like you were saying, if you could do it different, you'd go back and you'd have a phone where you could record some of your stuff and things like that.
Right.
I've got a few of those from 2012 when I was trying to do patter at a local club, and once I started getting a little more known in this area and all that, and calling my own dances, my wife said, "You've got to take that off of YouTube. Get rid of it."
Oh, you had it on YouTube.
I was impressed with myself.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm glad is not on YouTube of my own, so I know what you mean.
There's a couple of patterns out there. She was like, "You got to pull that off, because somebody from Florida is going to go in there and be like, we don't want that guy to ever come call here." That's
Oh,
years ago now. But So I'm fortunate enough. I've got some of my video. I wish there was some other stuff, but yeah, that we grew up at the same time, and I would love to have video of myself playing baseball in high school.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I thought I was going to play major leagues. I would love to go back and go. You really weren't as good as you thought you were, Charlie. Thought I was better than I was, but
Well,
a little better than it actually was most of the time. So
when I was a freshman, the only sport that I was interested in was soccer,
okay,
but we didn't have a soccer team. My Clark County, Winchester was just a little too small, I guess. But I kept asking for it. Sophomore year, I asked for it. No, we're not doing it. I said, but look, Lexington's got all these great teams we can play against their schools. No, nobody here is interested but you. And when I was a junior, they started one. And what did they tell me? We don't want you. You're too old. We only want the freshmen and sophomores in it.
no, that's awesome, man. Kevin, we've been going at it for about an hour, buddy. And like I was talking about, I try and keep it around that. And I would love to talk more to you. You've got more stories. I mean, you've got 10 years of full-time travel call, and then there's very few that are still around today that can say that. There's some out there, that are full-time callers.
Right.
And just with your background in music and everything, I'd love to talk to you again. I don't know where we might run into each other. Maybe we can agree to maybe the next Kentucky State Convention, you'll come down and finally see that hall. And so we can spend some time there. But other than that, what else? Of course, I'm going to the Caller Lab in South Carolina, and the national convention is Louisiana. Louisiana's not that far a drive for you. I mean, you've driven across the United States. You could come.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Where's it at in Louisiana? 50 bonus points.
I want to say where it is, but I'll be wrong if I just say it out loud. So I want to make sure. Name some major cities in Louisiana, I can tell you.
Nolens.
No, I would remember.
Baton Rouge, Shreveport. Okay, Shreveport.
Yep, that's where it is. Yeah, it's in Shreveport, and so we're gonna. Gosh, I think we're gonna drive over there. I'm not looking forward to that drive, but
I like driving through Louisiana. That's gorgeous state.
Yeah, I drove. I think the furthest I've driven. No, I've driven further than that. I've driven to San Antonio. My wife and I went to San Antonio when our son was graduating.
Now that's a long drive.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we took 2 days to get there. We stopped. We spent the night in New Orleans, and we spent the night in Houston, and then we went into San Antonio. I've got just my personal limit, 6 to 7 hours in the car. I could drive longer than that. My wife does a good job driving also, but no, I just at 6 or 7 hours, I'm done. The only time I'm going to go past that is if we're going to Tampa, which is from where we are in Atlanta. Depending on traffic, it's about 8 hours.
That's not bad.
Yeah, you can do it in 7. Just it depends on what kind of traffic you hit on 75 and everything. But beyond that, we were looking at somewhere yesterday when we were coming home. It was 12 hours, and I was like, "There's no way I'm driving 12 hours in a day. It's just not going to happen."
Wow.
I said we can. If you want to get a hotel, we'll do 6 and 6. I think it was for a dance. She's just like, we're not going to do 12 hours to go to a dance. So I don't know. Kevin, it has been a pleasure, brother. Man, it's great to get to finally sit down and talk to you. Hopefully we can do it in person one of these days. Would love to do this again. Like I said, this is coming out I told you earlier, this is going to come out this Friday, 17th. I think that's the 20th. I don't know. But this Friday, man. So I hope you keep watching. It was a pleasure getting to talk to you, finally get to meet you. And I want to do this again, maybe 6 months from now, and we'll talk some more about your square. I'll ask you how your lessons went. We'll kind of go from there.
Good. That sounds like a great plan. Hey, thank you for doing these interviews. I appreciate it from not just my perspective, but like you say, dancers are watching. They get a lot of out of it, getting to know their friends that are callers. But new callers, they got to be getting a tremendous value out of this. And I don't mean our interview, but the other interviews that you've done, that I've listened to, people have given out great advice and great little hints, great little get outs, little things that you can just take with you. So appreciate it.
Thanks for saying that, man. I do appreciate it. And you had some great advice. Not many people talk about the checkers. But that's a big part of it, with now I haven't met a whole lot of younger callers coming up, when I walk into a dance hall at our age, because we're the same age,
right?
We're typically some of the younger people in the hall still.
Yes. And still, that's exactly right.
So every now and then you run up on a caller who's in their 20s or 30s and it's only at a convention. If I see a convention, there's a couple of them out there. You're just like, wow, man, but they have all this at their fingertips, terminations and all that. So trying to get some of them to do checkers is rough.
Yeah.
It's not as fast.
But what I would tell people on that is, if you want to plan a get out that's yours, you can go backwards with the checkers, but you can't do it with the computers.
You can do it with the computer. That's good stuff. Kevin, that's great, brother. It's a pleasure talking to you, man. We'll do it again.
Thank you, sir.
All right, buddy. See you, Kevin.
See you.